Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you also to DoorDash for bringing me here today so we can explore the complex topic of gentrification together. So especially given what we're talking about, I want to first pay my respects through a land acknowledgement that the very place that we are gathered here today and engaging with one another today is the unceded indigenous land of the Tongva people. So as we continue to live and work on this land, I hope we can continue to strive towards indigenous justice and sovereignty. Thank you. As a quick introduction, I'm Jenny Dorsey. I'm a writer, chef, and founder of a research and advocacy organization called Studio Atao. For those who are unfamiliar with our work, we are a community-informed think tank that operates at the intersection of food and social justice. So our goal is to define more equitable standards for the food, beverage, and hospitality industry. So I also want to quickly note that I definitely don't have a 20-minute presentation memorized, so my brain only works in 1-minute increments thanks to TikTok, and so I will be referencing my notes from time to time on my phone. So back to the studio. At Studio Tao, something we really pride ourselves on doing is really diving headfirst into uncomfortable topics that generally the industry would prefer to stay away from and avoid. So that brings me to our main topic today, which is the interplay between hospitality businesses and gentrification. All right. Cool. This is our agenda today. And next. So last year, we started an initiative called the Neighborhoods Table that was oriented around creating an accessible framework to support hospitality businesses in navigating the complex issue that is gentrification, as well as encouraging food and beverage and media to more responsibly cover various openings or existing businesses when they're thinking about gentrifying neighborhoods. So to give everyone some context about the Neighborhoods Table, I'm going to play this short 3-minute trailer that we used to introduce the initiative last year.
Gentrification is one of the most pressing problems in the US today. 20% of neighborhoods in major cities have experienced gentrification since 2000. In Los Angeles County, gentrifying neighborhoods increased by 16% between 1990 and 2015. Rents increased at about 78% in some neighborhoods in New York City. This looks like familiar streets changing before our eyes. Feeling unwelcome in spaces we used to be comfortable in. Suddenly, we're unable to afford to live, eat, or shop in the places that we have set down roots. Hospitality businesses are often seen as the beginning signs of gentrification because they indicate investment and attention in specific neighborhoods. These businesses generally do not set out with the explicit goals of exclusion or displacement, but end up feeling caught in what seems like an inevitable cycle: improved community infrastructure at the cost of displacing and alienating long-term residents.
For some reason or another, there's been a omission of gentrification as an element in a story when covering a new restaurant or bar or brewery or coffee shop or etc. As journalists, we need to think about how we can evolve and start asking the tougher questions around gentrification and hospitality industry. What's missing right now is some kind of guide that both a journalist can follow to address the needs of the neighborhood and also for an entrepreneur to consider before opening up a new concept. And this is why the work that the Neighborhoods Table is doing is so important.
Our 2022 initiative, the Neighborhoods Table, sets out to create an actionable and a replicable framework that hospitality business owners and workers can really utilize to engage with and invest in the neighborhoods and communities that they're already part of. We see hospitality businesses as uniquely positioned to be able to combat gentrification from within the neighborhood's borders.
Hospitality is all about gathering, welcoming, and nurturing. We believe that by bringing together a community of business owners, residents, activists, and more, we can all learn how hospitality businesses can transform into sites of community care. We believe in returning solutions to the people and their lived experiences to ensure those most affected can be a part of the future of their own neighborhoods. We hope you'll join us as we build a table large enough to include our whole neighborhoods, our whole selves, and a future where hospitality and community investment are one and the same.
Thank you. All right, so I am so excited to officially announce that after 16 months of research and interviews and writing and editing, we finally released the toolkit for the initiatives table just this week. And this toolkit is a little different from our past ones. Our former work was around equitable representation within food and beverage media. So the toolkits we created were quite wordy and dense, since they were meant for the writers and editors that were happy to suffer through them. But this toolkit is made more like a resources hub. So there is a great set of different stages where hospitality businesses might find themselves and different strategies that a hospitality business can utilize throughout. So historically, there have been very few guidelines for how businesses can address community concerns on topics like gentrification. And so the goal of the toolkit is definitely not to blame businesses, but to find ways where we can align the community's needs with business practices. And hopefully this can ease not only tensions over time, but reimagine the role of hospitality businesses in neighborhoods and communities. So we hope that over time, this will not only improve profitability, but also the sustainability of the food, beverage, and hospitality industry. Before I get into strategies and case studies, I want to start off with some context and grounding on how we define gentrification and why it's really pertinent for hospitality businesses to really pay attention to the subject. So our working definition of gentrification is when a previously disinvested neighborhood changes significantly due to an influx of capital or interest in the neighborhood, and this leads to a rapid series of changes and new developments in the area. So there's some really good positives that come out of this. Better street lights, improved, just like generally better paved streets, often more green spaces, and also transit options will follow when you start seeing signs of gentrification. But the fundamental problem and how gentrification is different from revitalization is that these benefits are often not evenly distributed across the residents that are existing in the area. So a lot of times, especially low income and working class families end up being displaced, and legacy businesses also are forced to relocate. So as new businesses start to move in and have a different kind of agenda or are attracting different clientele, folks in the neighborhood might feel excluded or just simply not welcome and invited to these new options and new offerings that should be meant for everyone. So we focus on hospitality businesses because we focus on food, of course, but also because in the mainstream imagination of gentrification, hospitality businesses are often kind of seen as the signifier, as we mentioned in that video. So coffee shops, cocktail bars, wine bars, upscale restaurants, nicer grocery shops are often seen as kind of this initial wave of gentrification, and it prompts some pretty strong and intense reactions. So folks who are here from Los Angeles might remember the protests at Dunsmore over the summer, which when we were actually writing about gentrification through this toolkit. So I'm not going to comment about Dunsmore since we didn't interview them, but I do think it's fairly safe to say that for the most part, business owners and operators are not going into these neighborhoods with some malintent to gentrify or make things worse for the people that live there. However, in addition, it's also not possible for a single business to kind of reverse course on something that is a systemic issue that's not just a private business issue, but something that is a result of decades of racist policies, housing shortage, wages that have stagnated over time, et cetera. There's also kind of like a public plus private sector interventions that are needed to address something as massive as gentrification. But that being said, I think it's also fairly evident that hospitality businesses can implicitly contribute to gentrification when businesses enter an area that is seeing initial signs or in the throes of gentrification without proactively planning for or finding ways to embed a community vision that's going to be more beneficial for the folks that they're going to have as customers and community members that they want to invite into their space. So I think most folks here might be familiar with the criticisms around squirrel in Virgil Village, as well as some of Chef Jessica Coloslo's kind of negative comments around that neighborhood when she first moved in. So I want to point to one particular quote from a local writer that talks about kind of this backlash to squirrel and explains how gentrification and its impact aren't confined to physical access to space, but also it can be mental and emotional. So as he writes, squirrel's lines were a frequent reminder for local immigrant communities of just how many people could still afford more than $15 on a salad, even while on the same block, families struggle to make $15 an hour. So much so as passing through the area imposed a mental tax on longtime residents due to the prospect of further displacement. So the reality here is that if all goes well, folks lining up for your business is both a good thing and has things that you might want to consider as a business owner. So again, with this toolkit, what we hope to do is offer strategies that business owners can use to consider on how they want to thoughtfully engage with scenarios like this one and be respectful of local residents and their needs. So, as I mentioned previously, depending on what stage your business is in, the different strategies that you might want to undertake are going to look a lot different. So we split this toolkit across 4 different stages: before signing a lease, between signing a lease and opening, upon opening, and investing in the community's future. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to dig into 2 strategies within the first 2 stages to offer some examples of how everyone can expect to utilize or make use of this toolkit. So again, I want to make clear that this toolkit is not to pressure business owners into doing every single strategy, and definitely not at the same time. I think we all have enough on our plates, but rather we hope that we can offer a set of more than 20 vetted strategies from various business owners across the US that make it easier, provide tools for folks here, for anyone that you share this with, for business owners, operators, workers that you can utilize in the context that makes the most sense for you and your business. So the first strategy I want to talk about is when you're before signing the lease, surveying the community's residents and existing businesses. So across the toolkit, we always first offer, why is this important? So in this particular strategy, it's important to start showing that you are really, really interested in the buy-in of community members. You actually care about their opinions, and you want them involved in the process of decision-making before you open. So we also offer various action steps. These are kind of a summary of them in the toolkit. They're quite long. We tried our best to make it not wordy, but alas. So for this particular one, we talk about various metrics of success, action steps you can do in this process. And then we also highlighted one particular case study that is here local in Los Angeles, which is Barney Santos over at Boulevard Market in Montebello. So if you're not familiar with Boulevard Market, it's kind of like a food hall concept in Montebello. And part of the impetus for creating this was that Barney saw this space that had been unoccupied and vacant for years. It was owned by the city, and he really wanted to create something that would kind of attract and retain a lot of the younger generation in that area that was starting to move out and be less interested in the neighborhood. And so before he actually went ahead and started doing this, he actually started doing in-person surveys of community members over the course of several months, up to a year. So this resulted in over 100 in-person interviews where he asked everything from what kind of color do they want it on the chairs, what menu options, the vendors, the pricing. So really getting into, the nitty-gritty of the business, but also hearing the life stories of the people that he was talking to and continue to build on those relationships. So again, that doesn't mean everyone here suddenly needs to create this democratic decision-making process where you invite 100 people to the table and now we can't make any decisions, but rather finding ways to incorporate some of these learnings from Barney and Boulevard Market into your own business on how you can at least acquire some more data points from the community to inform some future decisions that you might be making. So it's also worth noting, as part of this process, Barney also hosted a town hall that was kind of out of the scope of his general hospitality business, but pertinent to the neighborhood, again, signaling this really intense, hey, I am invested here, I really care about you and of all the people that live here, not just as a stage of my business, but purely because I'm here for the long run. So something that was brought up as part of this was that folks wanted more affordable housing options in the area, and this kind of led to a public-private partnership where there is actually housing development that is being constructed right now across the street from Boulevard Market, which is really awesome. So next, I'm going to talk about a strategy that can be implemented while you're working towards opening, so kind of the stage 2 that we talked about. So this comes to us from Reams in Oakland, California. So talking about this internal playbook, a lot of times there's going to be opening, closing policies that are codified somewhere for training employees, but also how do we expand that to include things like conflict mediation, transformative justice, how we interact with law enforcement. So not only does this also give your employees actual tangible things that they can look upon if they're dealing with an issue at work, but also creating this kind of signals that you're really invested in co-creating this process where they can also think about the holistic impact of your business on the neighborhood. So for Reams in particular, Reem comes to us as a community organizer. She was also one of the advisors for this project. And being a community organizer has really informed how she wanted to build her restaurant as really a safe and inclusive space for the entirety of the community. So she, especially since one of the most common kind of strategies we hear in terms of investing in the local community is local hiring, when you think about creating a safe space for your business, it's also about creating a safe space for your employees as well as your customers, as well as the folks in the neighborhood. So she started by codifying her own kind of like restaurant approach ethos towards what does transformative justice look like in a restaurant setting while we're operating within the confines of capitalism and racism, all the other issues that kind of dictate our world today. So this was far more than just an employee handbook, but it really covered everything from like conflict mediation strategies, especially across different language. There was a lot of different languages being spoken in the front and the back of the house, and often that led to conflict that was very difficult to mediate. So how do we actually do that? What is the process for doing that? Also having transparent pay metrics so people know exactly what sort of skills they would have to show before they could be bumped to the next pay tier. There's ways that she also cross-trains everyone so no one ever feels they're kind of stuck in a station and can't progress throughout their career. So no one is doing dishes and that's like their only job. Everyone cycles through the dish station, everyone cycles through the bakery, everyone cycles through these different stations, and she calls it this process of trying to find what people care about the most, what people are naturally good at, and finding opportunities for them to thrive in those settings. Having a place for these practices also gave employees kind of a way to talk about the kind of things that they wanted to implement within the playbook themselves as new scenarios came up in their everyday work and life. So for example, how to interact with unhoused neighbors or how to deal with law enforcement officials that might come into this space. So for example, Reams has a policy now where they actually do not serve any police officers in uniform. They will serve them off uniform, but the presence of uniformed police officers, she realized, made some of her staff members as well as folks that she wanted to feel included in her space feel unwelcome and feel unsafe. So there's a ton more strategies listed in this toolkit that I unfortunately cannot talk about or else we'd be here for the next year. But I'm happy to answer any questions in just a few moments. And I just encourage everyone, you can head to this link and the toolkit will be there. There's 20 plus strategies that are, again, across 4 different stages, and it's free and public to everyone. So something we're going to do over the course of 2023 is continue this toolkit using 2 different white papers. So essentially documenting the processes, the successes, the failures, the obstacles of 2 businesses that are navigating, implementing some of these toolkit recommendations in real time in gentrifying cities across the US. So this is something that we had previously done with our work in equitable representation across food and beverage, food and beverage media, and we followed The Kitchen as well as Well and Good as they navigated a whole year across 2021, implementing really difficult diversity, equity, and inclusion practices at their workplace. And what we hope with these white papers is to offer some transparency of how difficult the change process really is. The change process is not linear, it's not fast, and it's full of mistakes, and really just normalizing not only sharing that with one another, but kind of owning and kind of failing upwards. So in conclusion, gentrification is a huge force that is sweeping across our country, and hospitality businesses definitely have a role in making sure that this can be something that we collaboratively and collectively navigate together so that we can resist being complicit in these inequities that are being disguised as progress for everyone. So with that, thank you all so much, and I think we have some time for questions as well. Oh, yes, question. Sorry. I have that tendency where I like never look to the right.
Hey y'all, Kim from Hotville Chicken, and in the opening segment, the video that you showed, I saw my neighborhood, not just where I live, but where my business is located, represented in that video. And I'm like, whoa, okay. So I recognize that new development coming into my community has a direct impact on how my business has operated over the past couple of years. Right there at the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Plaza Mall, which you showed prominently in that video. New developer just purchased a property in 2021, so we're just like a year into having a new owner, and they're going to be breaking ground next spring. And so all the points that you hit in that video talked about new transit coming through, got a new K-line coming down Crenshaw Boulevard, a new owner of the mall property that we're located, housing coming into the property, which will level the building that we're in. So we've got that transition happening. And then all that housing that's coming. So one of the things that I'm interested in, and when you've been talking about gentrification and displacement, the good and the bad, it's where we're located, there is a definite protest that's been prominent in the media about people who have been there for a long time and they don't want to see these new changes coming. So in the toolkit, can you talk about some of the things that you would introduce or instruct businesses to be able to relate to consumers or customers about how to maybe put on a different pair of glasses or a different perspective on inviting that new development, because it's not stopping, it's coming. There's nothing we can do to stop having buildings torn down or buildings that have been laying vacant for a long time. Well, it's been an eyesore in the community. When they do tear it down and housing goes up, well, the people who have been in that neighborhood for a long time can no longer afford to go into that property once they build those brand new spaces. So anyway, can you relate and talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you're saying, there's a lot of these pros and cons. It feels difficult because a lot of times it feels that in order to have some of these really positive benefits, like more transit and whatnot, you have to kind of give up people who have been living there for a really long time. So something that we talk about towards the end of the toolkit, so investing in the community, is not necessarily like we want no change. It's not that folks who are living in gentrifying areas don't want more options or don't want any of these positives, but rather making sure that the change happens on their terms and making sure that you as a business owner are also finding ways that you can leverage your power in sometimes, speaking to perhaps the Chamber of Commerce or even developers that will more likely pay attention to you than a person that happens to live there. So what are some ways that you can, open up your space, hear what people have to say, kind of like I mentioned with the case study with Barney, having some sort of open forum, creating your space as a place, a center where people know that they can gather and have their voice heard, and also finding ways to leverage, perhaps it's you working with other business owners to raise your voices together and talk to your council person. Perhaps it's going to the developer directly because you might be very adjacent to their development and they are probably going to do community surveys. They kind of have to do that as part of the development process, where you can say, hey, I know for a fact that the 100 people that gathered here in my town hall last week want these sort of things. And it doesn't have to be huge earth-shattering things to make a difference. It could be the setback from the sidewalk. Just we want that to be larger so that we don't have people piling into the street or piling into the sidewalk and making it difficult for residents to move around. It could be making sure that there's going to be parking access. It could be things just simply to make sure that folks in the area can maintain their quality of life and feel like they are included and welcome in that space. So I think it's about like navigating and finding ways to do it together. Thank you all so much. I'll be around if anybody has questions.